So how can we be careful with what we say? And what are some practical tips that we can have when we think about the power of the tongue when it comes to guarding ourselves with that?
Welcome to today's episode of Walking in Faith, a podcast to help you grow in your daily walk with God. Join Treg and David in this study of James as they take a closer look at the dangers of being double-minded. If you enjoyed today's study, please subscribe and share it with someone else.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Walking in Faith, our podcast, video cast brought to you from Morgantown, West Virginia. And let me tell you, Morgantown, West Virginia is cold this morning, David.
Yes.
Holy moly. About 20 degrees this morning. And just total transparency, I hate the cold. And I mean, it's beautiful, it's clear, but man, it's freezing. So David, you just live up the hill. Do you even warm your car up, or you just get in and freeze?
No,
and come down?
I just tough it out for the 30-second drive or whatever.
Just shiver for those 30 seconds. Yes, but I was thinking about that this morning as I was warming my car up. I'm like, I bet David doesn't even warm it up. He just jumps in and goes. So David doesn't live far away. I'm about 4 miles. In all my ministries, that's kind of been my modus operandi, is to be 4 miles from the church. And with 4 kids, it seems like we're always running back to the church for this or that, or do this or that. It's always something, with them. So 4 miles away, I still want it warm. I don't want it cold. But we're glad you're with us this morning, and welcome. By the time you guys watch this, I'll probably already have a procedure done. But even though the doctors, if you remember on the last video, said I had a clean bill of health, I got a phone call telling me it might not be, I might not be as healthy as I think I am. So I have a heart cath coming up tomorrow, and we'll give the results of that the next time we do a video. If it is a blockage, I'm just thankful they caught it early, and we can get a stent in and go on, and maybe it's a false reading.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I think actually if I'm able to do what I want to do, this video will be probably going live about the time that you're actually having a procedure. Okay. So if you're watching this, please pray for Pastor, because he'll probably be either about to go into surgery or just coming out of it right around then.
Awesome. Yeah, I would appreciate the prayers. It's God has a plan and a purpose, but when you're healthy and you feel good and you're exercising and you're doing everything right, you get a call like that, hey, you might have a blockage. It's kind of a shock, and then when you're just serving the Lord, doing what God wants you to do, and you still have a blockage, it's kind of a shock. But God has a plan and God has a purpose, and we just go through it. Thankful for doctors that can help us in those times. But yes, prayer is appreciated. All right, so we're going to dive back into the book of James, and we just kind of introduced this topic last time, David, but we're talking about the tongue and the things that we say. And the tongue is an interesting beast. There's no doubt about it. It can be sharp and it can be hard, but at the same time, it can be funny, And I think working with teenagers, that some things kids say are just funny, and then other things are funny, but they're not funny. and it's just unique when we think about the power of the tongue. And, the kids yesterday was Coleman's birthday, big 16. And we were just talking, and they were sharing some things about what other kids have said or how they've made fun of other kids. And some of it is just downright funny. But at the same time, you don't know how that child's going to take it. Were they hurt by that? We don't know. And that's the power of the tongue. And so it is an unruly evil. It can be a devastating power when you think of it that way. And we think of the media and the tongue and speech. I mean, just one speech or just a few words can go a long way. Mm-hmm. And as a public speaker, I think we need to weigh our words, especially. There was a Bible conference, and one man says one sentence, and that sentence is getting tweeted all over, Christendom. And what did you guys think about this one phrase? And probably when he said that phrase, he didn't mean anything by it, but people take it that way. And it's a shame, I think, too. And when you are public like that, and you do have thousands of people listening, that you can't just say what you want to say. It was Steve Lawson, and he said, all of evangelicalism makes up about 5%, of John MacArthur's, knowledge of the Bible or whatever. And people were taking that the wrong way. But at the same time, I don't know how many times I've said, this guy has forgotten more Bible than I'll ever know. And I'm not trying to make them out to be, a God. I'm just making a statement. So just things like that. But it's just one statement that people run with. Well, then they just 250 comments on every post and whatever. So the power of the tongue. So how can we be careful with what we say? And what are some practical tips that we can have when we think about the power of the tongue when it comes to guarding ourselves with that? Jeff Redlin, pastor at Campus Church, he made a statement, talking about appropriateness of music. And he just throws this out there. He's like, what my wife and I listen to in the bedroom is different than what we're going to have at church. And from that, there's 5,000 18 to 22-year-olds calling their parents saying, Mr. and Mrs. Redlin listen to rock music in their bedroom, and just probably thinking, no, it's country. But no, but it's just a statement. And then it goes viral like that. And all these parents, it's crazy. So even in your own realm and in your own world, let's say that you've got a big meeting or, you're talking to some people, maybe you're talking to some executives. How can I be careful with what I say? So we're just going to go through, we're going to look at 6 P's, the power of the tongue. So let's look at these 6 P's that we have. Number 1, David, I have is to perceive. Okay, we've got to be mindful to whom we are speaking, right? And so when we're in a meeting, we've got to be aware of the possibilities of their thoughts, their feelings, their actions in that present moment. And what we might say might be the truth, right? But before speaking it, we've got to take that moment to pause to think about, okay, what we want to say and how it might be received. Especially like in marital counseling, we might want to say something, but we've got to be very careful how that could be perceived. Because especially if you've got just the husband or just the wife for that one session, they can take that home and say, well, Pastor Spicer said. If I said, hey, I think it's good that you both would be in church together, one of them could go home and say, oh, Pastor Spicer said, we've got to be in church together this Sunday. Well, that's not what I said, but it could be perceived that way. And when you're having those conversations, it's taxing because that really weighs on you. Because you're not only just talking, you're thinking through every word that you're talking, and it can be tough. And so I think perception, we talk about reading a room, but when we're talking to people, we've got to read people. And some of it is knowing people too. I think like in a husband and wife relationship, we should know, and Peter tells us to know your wife. Well, we should know then there's things that we could say that could just really irritate our wives. Or maybe, if you're listening as a wife, there's things that you can say that can just set off your husband. And it's almost like we save those for the right time. You know what I mean? But that's knowledge says, look, you've got to know your spouse and know what you can and can't say. So in ministry, I've got to be careful on the things I say or don't say. Because there's certain things I can go home, Carrie's like, don't ask me, I don't know anything. But there's certain things that we do talk about at home, but there's certain things that we don't. Why? Because I know what she can handle, and I know if I said, hey, so-and-so said this today, she's going to be upset. Now, I can look at them tomorrow, and they can say they hated what I did and shake their hands and not be a problem. But Carrie's a different story. She's going to take that personally. How dare you do that to my husband? How dare you do that to my family? And it doesn't go over so well. And some of that's, I think, because she's been here for her whole life, and some of these people are people that she grew up with, and how dare you, say such a thing? That's not the person I remember. So you're seeing a side of them that you didn't see growing up. But some of it, again, going back to context, I've got to perceive that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So then number 2 I have here is to ponder. It goes up with perceive, I think, but to ponder is to listen more than you speak. Okay, so be swift to hear and be slow to speak, James says. So, David, what are some ways that we need to be slow to speak? I mean, what are some areas where you think we talk too much and maybe we should ponder?
Yeah, I think the most immediate application we can make with that is when we are having some type of argument or disagreement. Mm-hmm. Because, so going back to perceiving, I think a lot of times we may perceive that, hey, I shouldn't say this, but in the moment we'll be like, that's exactly what I need to say to have that cutting remark. But when we perceive and then to go to that next level and ponder and say, okay, thinking long term, this is not the best thing to say, because in that moment all we're thinking about is getting our point across,
right?
Or making sure that we look the best that we can, and we forget to think about, well, hey, this statement, I might have to be dealing with some of the blowback from this for weeks.
Yeah.
And if we don't take the time to ponder, all we're going to be thinking about is, man, I'm going to sound so cool.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to be able to show this person if I say that.
Right. I think even sometimes we should do that before we even post or send an email.
Yes.
Too.
Oh, absolutely.
When it comes to that. So, yes, to ponder. I think, again, in the pastorate situation, when it comes to counseling, when it comes to having that conversation, I think as a husband, especially as a husband, when it comes to our wives just talking, we are created to fix it. And I think most men have this mentality of, let me fix it. All right, so that's the problem, let me handle it. And sometimes that's not what our wives, a lot of times, that's not what our wives are wanting. They're just wanting someone to listen. And it's really hard, like in our family situation, because a lot of the frustration is coming from a school side with my wife. And I have the power to fix it. And so she gets frustrated at times. I'm like, okay, I'll just fire him. And she's like, no, that's not what I want you to do. I just want you to listen, We'll kick that kid out. No, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to listen. So our mentality is just to fix it, but we need to listen. And when we listen, again, that kind of goes back to perceive, but that allows us to get that person's perspective, before sharing our own. And when we ponder too, I think as we're thinking, questions are good. Because sometimes we talk to people, we don't know exactly where they're coming from. And so it's like, well, what do you mean by that? And, well, okay, I hear this statement, but can you go into more details, or can you clarify? And I think that's important because we don't fully understand or know. And I think questions can be incredibly powerful. Even starting off a difficult conversation is a good thing at times. So if we're going in and let's say you're a youth pastor, and from the pulpit, your pastor makes a comment that's kind of degrading to the youth department or to you as a youth pastor. And so you could come into a meeting and say, Pastor, I just got a question about your statement. What did you mean by that? Instead of coming in saying, how dare you say that? Why are you always degrading me? Then you're putting a question out there. Or maybe as a pastor, the youth pastor leaves the kitchen a mess. And there's pizza boxes everywhere when you come in Sunday morning to preach from Saturday's activity, and nothing's cleaned up. Instead of just yelling at the youth pastor Sunday morning, get this mess cleaned up, or texting him, I can't believe you left this a mess, get here now and clean this up. It's, hey, I'm just curious, why didn't you clean up after the outing Friday night? And it could be simply, Pastor, we had an emergency, we had to get out of there, and I totally forgot about it on Saturday. Or it could be, no reason, I should have done it, I'm sorry. But a question, can go a long way. So to perceive, to ponder. Number 3, to be precise. Be exact and be explicit. Use concise language to get our point across without rambling and going off on tangents. Even in speaking, in public speaking, as a pastor, even as a teacher, rambling can get you in trouble. I don't know. Did you have any professors, David, that were ramblers?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So did you enjoy the rambling, or did you like the other?
Sometimes, but most of the time when they rambled, it wasn't very profitable or enjoyable or anything.
We had a class that was a controversial class anyway, and questions galore. Church in the 20th. And, so it was, making a statement here, making a statement there about a certain group or a certain person. And, there'd be kids who loved that person and kids who didn't, and it was just question. My head spent more time on the desk than it did off the desk because it's just like, oh, here we go again. So my mentality was just get to the point, give me my notes, let me know what I need to do, as we go through this. And so in college, I liked precise. In preaching, I try to be precise, I think. I like to illustrate an application, but I want to make sure it's all pointed towards that thing. So even in storytelling, everything has a purpose. And so even with my preaching, I would like to say that everything I'm saying here has a purpose or has a point. We're all going towards that end goal. And so being precise and doing that, and again, thinking about the impact of our words and where am I going with this? So what's the point of this conversation and where am I going with it? And not allowing it go off track. And with teenagers, I think that's hard to do because you're trying to get precise with let's say the boys or Cammy, and I'm trying to get to a point, but dad, and usually but dad is taking me off tangent. To somebody else or to one of their other siblings or this or that. But let's steer this shit back to where it was going. And hey, let's get back on track. We've gone off track here. Anyway, let's get back to the main point of this conversation. And a lot of times you have to do that. And so it's not allowing our words to go off track because again, it's when I get there, I get into trouble. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I've got to keep things precise and I want to get to the point. So even in a situation, maybe if you're a college student, you're watching this, one of the best places to be precise is when you're breaking up with somebody. Don't, because the more you ramble and talk, the more you're going to not make sense in what you're saying. And you just got to be precise. Look, I don't think this is what God has for us. I don't think this is the direction God has for me. I'm sorry, but we've got to go separate ways. That's not an easy conversation to have. And they feel like it's unfair because you didn't go into details of why. But you don't need to go into details of why. You're just precise. My generation grew up watching Donald Trump on TV, The Apprentice. And a lot of times Trump didn't go into explicit details when he just pointed at somebody and said, "You're fired." But they were fired, and so it didn't matter because the point is the man behind the desk said you're done. And in those situations too, you got to be careful because every single word you say is going to be analyzed. And but you said this and this when you fired me. So in essence, what you were saying was, no, that's not what I said. So even those things are going to be weighed and you've got to be so precise and careful with what you say. And I think in some situations too, it's good to role play. All right, so I'm going to bring a teenager in. We're going to talk about this. Bring somebody in to play that teenager. And a lot of businesses will role play conversations before they ever happen. So listen, perceive, ponder, be precise. And really, I think that's all we got time for, David. Mm-hmm. So part 2 will be the last 3 that we talk about, and they're really good, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. But and they might be terrible, but it doesn't matter. It's kind of like Sean Hannity or whatever when he's on TV. He's like, "I've got some great information that you're going to need. Do not turn this off. And we're going to talk about it at the end of the program." You wait the whole program, and he never talks about anything. They're just trying to get people to watch more than just the opening monologue that they do. So, but I do promise you these next 3 will be worth listening to. And as I do the number 3, David, Cammie brought this up yesterday, and I don't know if it's true or not. She said all guys do number 3 like this, and all girls do number 3 like this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know either. Because I did something yesterday, and I went like this, and how many are we hitting? How many balls are we hitting the top golf net? And I went 3, and she starts laughing. She's like, "Do it again." I said 3. And she's like, "I just saw a thing that says all guys do 3 like this and all girls do 3 like that." And I'm like, well, yeah, because that's easy. I mean, that takes effort.
Yeah.
Guys are going to be lazy and do the easiest one. So there you go. If you stayed and watched this whole thing, you learned something, and you can go and ask people. I want to go around Topgolf and asking all the guys to do it. She wouldn't let me. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Like, subscribe, jump in, let others know about this podcast, and we hope it is an encouragement and a blessing to you. And next week, we'll look at James chapter 3 and the power of the tongue.